Well, we'll do this latest event from the Open Group. Today is being brought to us by a Open Group member, Corso. Today's speaker is Corso CEO Martin Owen. Before I go to Martin to start his presentation, let me just go over a few housekeeping issues, just to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, we would encourage you to ask questions. It's a great opportunity to ask questions of people like Martin. And probably the best way to submit a question is to write it in the text QA. If you do submit a question in the text QA, can I ask you to address it to all or all participants, and that gets to see the questions that are being submitted. And we'll transfer as many questions at the end of Martin's presentation. If you'd like to write a simple comment or observation or share a view with a fellow attendee, then the best way to do that is to use the text chat facility. Again, if you're going to submit a question you'd like Martin to address, then use the text QA facility, please. This is also being recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early or experience any local technical difficulties, such as audio outage, then a full event recording will be available from tomorrow, and anyone who's registered will get an email with the appropriate link to where they can access that recording. And while we're talking about audio, if you do experience any audio over the internet, then you can always join the teleconference. To do that, simply to click on the communicate button, and it will guide you through how to join that audio teleconference. So if you're ready, can I ask you to start your presentation?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Son. So, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Martin Owen from Corso. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about road mapping today, and using road mapping techniques with both ArchiMate and TOGAF. As said, if you have any issues throughout the presentation, you can always go to our website at corso3.com, where we can interact with you. The other thing as well is at the end, obviously we'll go to some questions, so I'll probably spend about 40 minutes presenting slides to you and taking you through some of the concepts. Again, feel free to ask anything at all, and we'll try and cover as many questions as we can at the end. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Corso. Corso's been going for nearly 3 years. My background is in enterprise architecture, and I've worked for various companies including Popkin Software, Telelogic, and lately IBM, where I was the global product director for enterprise architecture and portfolio management. I also worked on the first incarnation of the BMN spec, the Business Process Modeling Notation specification. I'm now working and have been working on mapping ArchiMate to UML within the Open Group. And as a photo there, my hobby is playing rugby. So, hence, if you look closely at my ears, you'll see they've got lots of cauliflowered ears. A little bit about Corso itself. We have offices in the US, the UK, and Australia. A small office in Canada as well. Most of the people within Corso are part of the former IBM System Architect team, so we're responsible for enterprise architecture products within IBM. We created a company to look at addressing gaps in both enterprise architecture and portfolio management, and looking at strategic planning and how we add more business value around enterprise architecture. Lately, we've started to look at agile enterprise architecture and how that fits into the market space, and then also looking at techniques like road mapping, and then how road mapping is being used by our customers. So we have a core network of IBM portfolio management tooling specialists, and we're IBM partners, so we specialize in products. We also do hosting of IBM products as well, and provide consulting and training services. So very focused around tooling, focused around method, adding methods to our customers. So what we're covering in this presentation, we're going to have a look at an overview of road mapping. What is it? Core concepts, the capabilities you need and you need to understand in order to roll out road mapping to your teams. Supporting meta model behind all of this. How does it hang together? What are the various viewpoints we're interested in? But what are the lessons that we've learned over the last few years in terms of delivering roadmap consistently to customers. Now, the interesting thing about road mapping is that the more we work on this from a Corso perspective and the more we work with our customers, we're seeing our ideas all the time about how we can generate roadmaps and what roadmaps are. Okay, so we've been working with a number of global customers around managing roadmaps. Roadmaps take a number of forms. So when we talk about road mapping can take place at a strategic level. So it's the thing that you can communicate to executives in the organisation. It can around things like Gantt charts, and looking at projects and work package roadmaps. We can look at life cycles, so that's things like what birth of things, when do they exist, when do you sunset or decommission something. And there's different types of domain roadmaps, so things like technologies, applications, business processes, capabilities. So types of roadmaps, and we'll address some of these as we go through the presentation. Now, in order to get a consistent roadmap, then you need techniques behind the scenes, like TOGAF, ArchiMate, and to some extent things like ODAF for the Department of Defence Architecture Framework and MODAF for the Ministry of Defence Architectural Framework. And most of these frameworks and architectural disciplines need to be enough to support full road mapping capabilities. And I'll show you what I mean by that as we move through the presentation. So when we're to build in our organisation, and when we're talking to our customers, if you like, we always lead with mapping as the output, or the visualization of all the products that they're interested in terms of making business decisions. So roadmaps are really an output from enterprise architecture, and the great communication vehicle to have a discussion with various stakeholders in the organisation. And really what happens is we demonstrate a roadmap, then we show what after inside that roadmap, i.e. like time, dates, utility, applications and technologies. And we discuss how that roadmap is created with enterprise architecture and portfolio management. Lead conversations in the organisation with a discussion about enterprise architecture, we always lead with roadmaps. So a little look at the strategic planning life cycle and the enterprise architecture life cycle. It's the ADM from TOGAF. So it's the way that we go through constructing enterprise architecture. It's the method for enterprise architecture. It shows us the building blocks and in which sequence and order they can be constructed within. The techniques that are involved inside here are things like vision strategy, business architecture, IS architecture, looking at developing technologies. Then we looked at opportunity solutions. So where can we increase benefit to the organisation, and how do we get there with a migration plan? And then how do we govern that implementation? And then how do we manage change? All driven by requirements. Now, the interesting thing as we move through this is that there are various iterations in terms of architecture that we can move through. So the way that you see is architecture context iteration. So this is looking at what's the context of you building architectures. Then there's architecture definition iteration, which is really about how do we move through building the process, organisation location, IS view, the technology view. And transition planning iterations, so moving through cycles of transition planning and how we're going to get there, and then going through iterations of governance. So there are many life cycles and iterations for managing the life cycle of enterprise architecture and strategic planning. Now, when we move change cycle, this is very different than if we're doing change within software development, where it's much more rapid. We go through high approval cycles and things like governance. We make various workflows in terms of change management. So it can be slower, although that set is changing when we start to talk about agile enterprise architecture. The main output from our architecture is a blueprint with recommendations for change and constraints of how we can't change things. And the migration exercise and how we transition between different opportunities and solutions is usually represented by a roadmap. And that focus on today, having a look at the roadmap for how we do transition planning between current state and future state architectures, and the costs involved in managing those change programs. Okay. Quite a complex slide, showing you an example implementation migration pattern. So these typically, I've removed a lot of the content from one of our customers here, but typically the type of thing that you may do as you move through the life cycle of enterprise architecture. So if we look at the central circle, or the left-hand circle here, which is called EA version 1.2, this is a first iteration of our architecture. It's a baseline, and moving from left to right on this baseline. And the first thing we may do on here is we may look at here, which is in the ADM, and we set the constraints and the guidelines for how we want to govern our architecture. We may decide at the top here that we've got different options for migration planning, X and Y. We decide that we're going to implement Y as architectures, and then we move to a new baseline of version 1.3 of our architecture. We have coming in, as an example here, an outsourcing initiative. So we may decide we're going to outsource some of our work, some of the things that we do as an organisation. That might involve parts of the business, it might involve parts of our IT. Suppose option A and option B. Break down option B into B2 and B1 as different alternatives. We may do at the same time we break out option D because we're creating and getting feedback from the organisation into architecture. So we show our blueprint. We go to version 2 here, and we do anything at all with our outsourcing initiative. So we can we go acquisition, and again we get a target architecture. Particularly what's happening inside organisations. So the enterprise architecture is quite volatile. We're making lots of decisions. We're looking at the impact of change across different things. Obviously, in terms of roadmaps, roadmaps affect what we do. They drive some decisions we make about timing. So let's have a look at the next slide. And here another more detailed as is and to be scenario. So if we take version 1.3 on here, and what we can see here is we've got 2B alternative X and 2B alternative Y. You can see at the top here we're introducing more data, more information. At the bottom we change some of the technology stack. And what we can see here is that we're actually going to increase revenue in Y, and we're going to make revenue by doing X. We go on to version 1.4. And what are you on here? There's an in-link now between enterprise architecture and things like portfolio management, where you're looking at the cost and resource of people, systems, processes, capabilities. And that's an interesting area also that we focus on. So we look at enterprise architecture, but also portfolio management together, and then roadmaps to drive cost forward, having a look at what the cost scenarios are, as well as the enterprise architecture and the technical architecture. So let's have a move forward and look at some of the important concepts that we need to do for road mapping. So one of the things to understand is workspaces, or as they're called in ArchiMate, they're called plateaus. They're important. We'll go into what they are in more detail, but from a high level, for us to actually segment our architecture into current and future state sets. Gaps. So gaps are looking at what we need to get from one plateau to the next. With a gap between the two things, and then look at the resources and the resource plans we need to actually build and address that gap. Workages, how we package up our work, be done. Milestones, are the points in time where we want to deliver something. So we want to either move through a gate, we have a set time where we've got to deliver a piece of work. Life cycles are important, and life states. So these are things like when we want to have the birth of a piece of our architecture, whether we want it to production, whether we want to sit or decommission it. So those cycles and life cycle states. I've got components and versions, and these are really important. So as we start to move through we're really interested in what the versions are and what components relate to other things, because that can have an impact on what we do. Actually, costs are really important in terms of managing the cost scenario. Some of these concepts we'll see as we move through are inside ArchiMate and TOGAF, some, and I'll highlight the bits that aren't in those frameworks for you. Some of the important capabilities. So these are things that you need to understand and be able to do around architecture. You need to be able to compare things. So if you're looking at current state versus future state, and you're looking at roadmaps of how to get from one state to the next, then you're interested in comparing a current and future state, or two future states, so you can make some better decisions. You're going to be interested in heat maps. So can I change some of the depictions or the icons or the colours of some of my architecture as I start to look at roadmaps? You're interested in versions, as I mentioned. So if a version of Salesforce.com, for example, delivers a different capability to the previous version, that's interesting and that's important. We're interested in audit trailing, who's done what and when. Probably most importantly, impact assessment. So if I change something via a roadmap, the impact on the rest of my architecture. So those are important capabilities. Okay, so aspect of moving a roadmap forward is business motivation. And business motivation is available both in TOGAF and ArchiMate. It's part of the meta model for both of those frameworks. So business motivation is the reason why you're doing change. It's the reason why you're transforming your architecture and you're moving from one place to the next. And quite often the business motivation is important because it tells you what's driving the roadmap forward. Usually, more requirements for change, and as we saw with the TOGAF ADM at the beginning of the presentation, then requirements are crucial and essential to the way that we drive our architecture. And you can manage these. Some tools you can manage them in enterprise architecture tools, but you can also model them in separate requirements management tools if you're doing heavy requirements management. Change needs to be designed and implemented in a series of work packages. This is important because if you're doing a straightforward enterprise architecture initiative, you gauge the pieces of work you've got. And it's important if you're doing things like agile enterprise architecture, where you want to move into things like sprints and start at how you deliver short increments of work. It's important to understand what those work packages are. And the roads themselves are the anticipated change that we intend to introduce over time. So if you're moving from current state to a future state, your map will drive and address that gap. And you get different types of roadmaps that you can compare to each other. There's a gap between a current state and a future state. Okay, as I mentioned, then both ArchiMate and TOGAF support business motivation modeling. Both and TOGAF support work packages, gaps, and requirements. They're part of the standard specification. One of the things inside here is that ArchiMate has specific support for plateaus, which I'll come on to next. So a visual of the simple TOGAF meta model. You can see here that at the top there we've got work package, gap, and requirement. You'll be associated with anything inside the meta model at all. So for example, we can have a work package which is implementing a series of business processes. We can have a work package associated with technology application components. Okay, subset of the ArchiMate meta model. Now, the things we've done here is, as I mentioned then, both ArchiMate and TOGAF support work packages. Now, in our tooling, we've introduced the concept of a work package milestone. So, work package to include the ability to represent things at a moment in time. And temporal, or the time aspects, is one thing that's missing inside both ArchiMate and TOGAF. So we've added those in. Our concept of a being represented by what we call a workspace, and we'll address that further inside the presentation. So, an enterprise architecture workspace is the equivalent to, but it's a container of EA model artifacts. So, for example, if I think about, or we think about a plateau representing a current state piece of architecture, spans across model views. It goes to different domains. So it could be business architecture, technology architecture. It could be looking at our information architecture. A workspace or a plateau is isolated for the purpose of a dedicated project, program, or sandbox. Effectively, the workspace itself is representing. It could be representing a target piece of architecture. It could be representing a merge position, as we saw earlier on. That's represented by a workspace. We can base on a workspace, and we can create new workspaces from baseline workspaces, and we can create tasks and pieces of work with each individual workspace. Space is a way of us organising our architecture into specific pieces of domains or views that we can use to manage our set of flows. So, Arch has a very important view, and this isn't available inside TOGAF, but it's a very useful thing to add in. It has an implementation of migration view. A model or a view inside ArchiMate, and the underlying for that view gives us plateaus, gaps, work products and deliverables, and work packages. So this is a great way of representing your workspace plateau structure. And we find, certainly for our customers that we work with, one of the starting off points is to start looking at how you're going to organise your architecture in terms of plateaus, what you expect your current future states to be, and what products you're going to deliver over time. Okay, so normally, before ArchiMate was on the scene, normally you'd document in PowerPoint or an Excel spreadsheet while you're using something like TOGAF. It brings out a really nice view for you with the underlying model concepts. Work packages represent pieces of work. They have a given start and end time. You can use work packages to represent pieces of work at variables. These include things like texts, objects, programs of work. It has a start and end type that produces a work product. The work packages have milestones. So they were the status of information or pieces of work over time. Now, timeline is a view. So a timeline is a view of our underlying model, and it represents a series of widgets and their milestones over time. And when we show timelines here, we're doing milestones as pies, and this is a well-known concept. So what we've done here is reused a view in the MODAF and DODAF specifications to show timelines. So it's not something that Corsair that we're just making up on the fly. It's a well-known modelling view, and we've presented this and put it inside both Arch and TOGAF, and start to present the work packages as timelines. So show dependencies between those milestones as well. Let's take a quick look at what it looks like. This is the view, and what we can see from this view is that we've got work packages are going horizontally across the screen here. Show that the milestones are pies, and the left to right. If you look at the bottom there, we're going from, in this example here, we're going from 2011 to 2015. Automatically, our tooling is laying out the orders. And what I mention here is the tooling we use here at Corso is IBM Rational System Architect. In the program timeline here with milestones, and the work packages are the boxes. Now this view is laid out automatically for you based on the underlying model, so you don't need to draw this by hand. The segments inside the pie, the different colours there, they represent different statuses at those different gates or different milestones. So you customise these yourselves. As default, we put things in there like risk, cost, and resource requirements, and we code these in depending on data of those three attributes at each milestone. Customise those yourselves. The more attributes you add in, you get more segments in the pie. Okay, mentioned, a milestone, an event in a work package. A milestone represented by a date, and the segments of the pie depict values, and you can customize those to meet different scenarios. Now, I think an important aspect of this, and one of the reasons drivers for organizations is cost. So packages and deliverables are associated with cost. And we put in things like budgeted cost and actual cost. And quite a people that are doing road mapping tend to be in PowerPoint, Excel, and they use Excel to manage their costs. You can import Excel into our tooling, or from a portfolio management tool, but you can get the costs with the actual work packages, which are a fundamental part of the enterprise architecture. So out there really is the benefit of using a roadmap with costing information behind it, so you can roll this all up. Now, I mentioned that life cycles were critical. Again, this is an area we've ended for TOGAF and ArchiMate. Life cycles are really important. So cycles allow us to specify the type aspects for architecture. And a life cycle shows the different states that any enterprise architecture artifact can move through over time. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there are different cycles like birth, in production, set, decon. Most of them I've spoken to own set of life cycles, yet they're often not very consistent. They're described in PowerPoint and Excel. So we put some standard life cycle states together. Although we do recognise customers can change their own life cycle states, we provided two different sets of life cycles. One on deployment, how you deploy things, and the other is on usage. So how do our end users expect to use these things and the life cycle of the usage? I'll give you an example of this in a moment. But the cycles themselves relate to milestones. Simple. If I have a decommission life cycle for a particular, let's say, an application component, be tied to a piece of work, which is contained within a work package. So you have traceability all the way through from work package to milestone to the life cycles for a roadmap, and the other way around. So anything that you're going to create or have birth or be in production or in use of, you can trace back to work packages. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the TOGAF meta model. So from here we've got some things that we've added in with ArchiMate and TOGAF, and you can see plateaus, deliverables, and work packages, which is common to both ArchiMate and TOGAF. You hear that we've added in a work package milestone in the middle there, which is life cycle states, birth, deploy, in production, etc. and those can relate to any architecture artifact inside TOGAF or ArchiMate. And that means that we can then start discussing the types of roadmaps. So we could have, for example, a location roadmap. Yeah, we're going to bring different locations into play. Yeah, so when am I going to open a new office? When am I going to close one down? When am I going to introduce a data center? When am I going to business processes? When am I going to do an application portfolio management exercise and rationalize my applications? When I look at business capabilities, implementing those. So all of the life cycle states and all will be laid out inside a roadmap. Now, as a set of life cycles in building, and I mentioned most organizations have their own life cycles, and allow you to put your own in here, and to also use in large enterprises a series of synonyms, so you can have the different names for life cycles for different parts of the organization, which is quite important, while maintaining the consistency of the enterprise architecture. Okay, so I mentioned deployment life cycles. So we have on here birth, planning, implementation, when it's in production, and then when you retire it. So these are the deployment life cycles we ship with. Birth is when you think of something. Planning is when you plan out the deployment. Implementation is when you're doing the deployment. Production is when it's being used, when it's available. And retired is when we sunset it. Obviously change it to suit yourselves. And then we've got life cycles. This is when to plan the use, train people how to use business or technology or applications, when are they available, when are they commissioned, and then when finally are they sunset. And it's interesting because most organizations focus on deployment life cycles and not life cycles. And in fact, some organizations have more than just deployment and usage as well. And that's important. So if we look at a TOGAF view of, for example, application components, then the left-hand column here is your deployment cycles, and column, which you can see one of on here, is showing you the usage life cycles. And we can visually look at those side by side. It's important because that allows us to look at gaps between when an organization is, for example, put into production, and looking for matches to when people are going to be trained in something. And that's where heat mapping comes in. So what we can to highlight on here, with, for example, pens or different colours, is those gaps between the deployment cycles that are in use and the cycles. And here you can see that this is for 2014. So this is looking at the cycle states for application components for 2014, and then highlighting where there's issues. And here, is if I look at concrete for the first option on there, it's yellow, so it's in planning phase. But from a usage perspective, it's a solid line around it, so the user is going to be available. So obviously this match there that we can address. Okay, the other important aspect is comparison. So, and this is multi-tiered. It's multi-dimensional. So as I mentioned before, this is an implementation and migration view. So looking at current state architecture, and we're looking at gaps, and we're looking at such as the architectures of 2014 and 2015. And we're looking at works and work packages, things we need to do. Within those architectures, we've also got roadmaps and heat maps. So you can start to compare individual roadmaps, architectures against each other. So we can look at things, but from different time slices of how we'd expect it to be in one architecture versus the other. So it is really important because it allows us to make real decisions about what we're doing. Okay, here's an example of an overall roadmap. So one of the important aspects of road mapping is still being able to communicate to the business and IT people as they expect you to communicate with them. One of those is Excel. So we provide Excel roadmap. This looks like, so it's very straightforward, very simple, but it's based on the underlying architecture. So it's based on TOGAF and/or ArchiMate. This example here you can see, when we map on test, when we start to look at the mapping of the meta model, you can see at the top here we've got an organizational unit, and we've got business services in the middle here, the application components in rows 24 and onward, and then inly here we're picking up automatically all the lifecycle states from the underlying model and out into a nice column spreadsheet. Automatically see when things are available, when they're retired, what the lifecycle states are, and we can also put in here the costing information as well, which is rolled up automatically. So it looks like a very simple spreadsheet to business. It's actually driven by the underlying enterprise architecture and the architecture. And to consistency out for the organization, you need something like TOGAF or ArchiMate. These makes certainly previous roles I've had when I've been doing product management is drawing out consistent roadmaps and having PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheets all of the time to address particular needs. Okay, another variation on the same thing here. This time you can see we're bringing out the different colours, but the other thing we're bringing out here is the technology components as well. So as I mentioned earlier on, we've got the ability on this to bring out different types of assets from our architecture, whether it's processes or capabilities or anything else, as in a spreadsheet. These roadmaps on anything as long as they have a set of life cycle states. Another road view is this type of thing here. This is a what we call a side view of architecture, looking at differences over time in the architecture itself. This is still a roadmap, but it's generated into a side-by-side view. So here I can see 2013, 14, 15, and 16 here. You can see how architecture changes over time. And we can use color coding and heat mapping to differences and where things are added or removed. Ways of showing aspect time, and that's really what a roadmap's about. Another one here is looking at life cycles here. So, for example, I can look at maybe a set scenario. So we can look at things like all of the enterprise architecture assets that are sunset between 2014 or 2014 and September 2014. And then everything else in the view we can hide because it's not relevant. We're only interested in things that are going to be sunset between those two dates. This is another way of slicing out time, focus on what a roadmap is. From a visual perspective, I can do it in this manner as well. Okay, and if you want to go into other aspects, then you also map roadmaps into things like portfolio management tools. So IBM National Focal Point is one, but you can start to look at what are the priorities of some of the assets we're doing in terms of time. What resources have I got available to be able to actually support these? Benefits realization, business cases. I'm doing Gantt charts here, so we start to see, and this is on the screen here, it's not very big, but you can see, for example, projects laid out over time, and their costing, which is at the bottom there. So what lesson have we learned over over the past couple of years of doing this. So, yeah, right maps are a great way to drive value out of enterprise architecture. So they take what is a very subject, communicate about enterprise architecture to the rest of the business. We map a repository strategy before we embark on enterprise architecture. So rather than building EA's sake, you start to look at the plateaus we need, what to represent. Plateaus into play, as I showed you at the beginning, where things like mergers and acquisitions or different entry points that might drive EA, then we can start to look at how we map out the repository. And that's part of our way of doing architecture, and that's why implementation and migration views are important. We can look at common terms for lifecycle states, talk about decommission. Everybody understands what decommission is. On Earth, it's the same thing across the business. We can add plural states to EA concepts. So most of the things that you see inside TOGAF and ArchiMate, you can add a start and an 8 to them. You can add in a lifecycle state to those EA assets, so you start to see how they are over time. So again, when is it born? When is it in production? We decommission it. Then when do we retire it? Need to understand how enterprise architecture fits with portfolio management, because quite often there'll be some overlap. So if you're talking about roadmaps and costs and tasks, and you're from an enterprise architecture perspective, there'll be some overlap with the portfolio management teams, and vice versa. The portfolio management team, if you're talking about costs, tasks, wraps, workages, then you need to communicate with the enterprise architecture team. So mapping is a great conversation builder for driving that communication between the EA side and the portfolio management side. And probably the most useful things here is ensuring that your output that you create to the business, you don't roll up with a portfolio management tool or an enterprise architecture tool and try and start demonstrating it and have a conversation with the business or the non-architecture community. So you need to deliver inside things like PowerPoint, Excel, discuss the roadmap's contexts, and if they ask, you can always work backwards to the architecture, to TOGAF or ArchiMate. Okay, in a moment I'll take some questions. For information, by the way, on Corso3.com, there's software. There's some books which would be great to have some input from everybody on the webinar on some of our blogs and discussions. We're talking about roadmaps and portfolio management versus EA. There's also white papers we put together as well. So I'm happy to take some questions. And Simon, I guess you're going to facilitate some questions.
Yes, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Martin. Just to go on to the questions, been some requests with regards to the availability of the slides you've used today. Any plans to make your slides available, Martin?
Yeah, they'll be available on our website. So
fantastic. So if you need a copy of Martin's slides, visit the Corso website. And if anyone has any difficulties there, they can always contact me, and I will facilitate that for you. So we have some questions on the chat and on the QA. Let's start one on the QA, Martin. This is from Sendar, asking, on the first roadmap example, the example uses logical... Hang on a minute, just move down a bit. The example uses logical application components and their life cycle stages. Is it possible to clearly show the physical components and how one set of components will be replaced by new ones?
So the question there, is really, can you, so obviously TOGAF and ArchiMate support logical and physical application components. So you can actually tie different life cycle states to each of those types of application, and then lay out a roadmap on those work packages for both of those. It's a short answer. Still there?
Sorry, I was on mute there. So next question. We face challenges while adopting anything in an agile environment. How do we selectively adopt and which components would be useful so that it is customised to an agile environment?
That's a real interesting question, actually, and something that probably we will do another webinar on in Q1 next year around agile enterprise architecture, and I think road mapping is an important part of that. But early thoughts on that, then obviously things like work packages are important. So acting out work packages and life cycles and be able to put dates around those is and tap back into an agile approach is probably the key factor. We're here at Corso at things like Kanban and Scrum, and then how you can take some techniques within those and start to identify which parts of the architecture are important, and only doing those bits which are important. So not to model the world, but really focus on just enough architecture to get this done. So you may find that you actually cut through a set of the whole meta model, but you go to a lot of depth in some aspects. Interesting conversation, by the way, and we'll be starting a blog on in the next couple of weeks as well.
Excellent. Question here from Paul. On the side-by-side view of daily changes, can be displayed as layers on top of each other rather than side by side?
Yes, that's simple. So tooling, yes, we have layers. You have as many diagrams as you like on layers. The issue with layers is that if things have aesthetically changed over time, it's sometimes hard to see what the differences are as you fade back through different years and different time periods.
Okay. Question here from Philip. He says, hello, Mark. Thank you very much for a great talk. I have one question regarding the point where the B models gaps are identified and work pages are identified to close them. He says, how can you make sure you have enough resources to do this?
Okay, and that's an overlap where you really go into the portfolio management area. You can start to take your work packages you're looking at within each plateau, cross into a portfolio management environment, and then start to look at resource usage and assigning work packages and resources inside the portfolio management area. Something where tools like Focal Point, IBM Rational Focal Point, really become useful.
Okay, thank you. A question here for Amit. How do you relate BPMN models to changed components?
Yep, that's very straightforward and simple. So the answer is yes. So you can create businesses within a BPU, and you can track through work pages, change items. You can tie them into the architecture. In fact, anything inside a bit process you can lay out inside the roadmap.
Okay, thank you. A question here from Thomas. Which three things should one focus on when starting out from scratch with road mapping?
Good question. Okay. So start off understanding life cycles. So life cycles the business understands. So that's the birth, planning, production, demand. So whatever terminology is, number one is get the terminology right for the maps. Number two is probably start to understand which things are going to be appearing on roadmaps. Then to build roadmaps for. So is it applications? Is it technologies? Start to look at what exercise you're going to use roadmaps for. So if you're doing application portfolio management or application rationalization, it's probably going to be application and technology. So that's the second thing. And probably the third thing I'd look at doing is using things like the implementation and migration view to manage the different entry points that you're addressing in the organization and how they affect the roadmap.
Okay. Next question here. This question from Mary. She asks, how long does a typical road mapping of an application portfolio take using TOGAF or ArchiMate or IMSA?
Okay. I'll say, well, first it depends on the quality of the information you gather. So it depends whether you've got access to everything. But typically, it ranges from a couple of weeks to 4 months. It really depends on the size of the IT estate, and again, it all depends on whether you're going to work in an agile manner or whether you're going to work in a model everything manner. I would suggest working in an agile manner where you identify the hot things that are important from an application portfolio management perspective. What are the pain points? What are the capabilities? And then make it very small and iterative. You could probably get something done in 2 to 4 weeks.
A question here from Zaman saying, I would like to know how I make an approach to management to implement EA for strategic planning. He understands that's a big question, but do you have any advice there?
Yeah, so I would start off with road mapping. A conversation about how important roadmaps are for the organisation to visualise their cost and their spend over time. How they tie back to business capability. Because the business is interested in delivering business capability for their customers, and if you can tie roadmaps to that, you'd have a sensible conversation with them. And then you mention, oh, by the way, this is underpinned by enterprise architecture and strategic planning. So I would definitely lead with a roadmap. Definitely have a conversation about a roadmap. I would not have a conversation about enterprise architecture. That's the method and the sense behind building the roadmap.
Okay, thank you. Question, Justin. How do you explain how you produce the roadmap to a customer that doesn't use or understand ArchiMate? Okay,
so I would break it. So you copy these slides, obviously, but there's a slide we use in the deck here that takes you through the roadmap, then break it down into chunks for the end user. And the third step was talking about enterprise architecture. Very rarely will you go to the third step unless they're really interested. What they're interested in is what the building blocks are. So 3-step map, which is show the roadmap, show the building blocks, and then map to the enterprise architecture. You need to use the word, enterprise architecture.
Okay. Question here from Amit. If there is any change in a business process, how is this related to business application data components?
Okay, straightforward impact analysis. So, and this is why it's important to tie things together with TOGAF and ArchiMate. So you've then got the traceability through from the business process to the application and technology components. And that's where you do need tooling. So you need tooling to help you look at the impact. If you do that type of thing in Visio or PowerPoint, or even to extend to Excel, it's very difficult to do.
Okay, great, Martin. I think we've come into the end of our time, so I think this is probably a good time to draw to a close. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make, Martin?
If people to reach out, they can reach out to martin.owen@corso3.com. Questions, I'm quite happy to take questions and answer them by email.
That's it, Martin. Thank you very much, Martin, for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Once again, if you have any trouble getting hold of Martin's slides or trouble getting access to today's recording, then please don't hesitate to send me, Simon Lofthouse, an email. So once again, Martin, many thanks for your time, and draw the event to a conclusion now. Thank you.